Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have two amazing guests to introduce to you now. Noel Heiks and Kevin Key are authors of The Cow is How to Fix Food, Farming, and Pharma. The book is a saga inspired by fighting a family's diabetes, Parkinson's, and mental health issues induced by the standard American diet. The authors travel on a journey through industrial agriculture in America, where the food we grow destroys not only the health of our people, but that of our heartland. Engineer-turned-cattle-enthusiast Noel Heiks and cowboy-commando Kevin Key, cowboy-commando, I won't be that, dive into the impacts of big food, farming, and pharma. The authors embark on an adventure of food and diet, away from the standard insulin-heavy fare and towards better ways of beef, keto, and carnivore. The book encourages us to break the shackles of the modern medical system that is keeping us fat and sick, and turn to the thriving doctors embracing beef, butter, and bacon. The story rides through the ranches to meet the producers who are key to an animal-based future filled with cows. Through their book, the authors share the secret of restoring our country to vitality and prosperity. The Cow is How. You can find the book on Amazon, and again, the title is The Cow is How to Fix Food, Farming, and Pharma. Noel and Kevin, what an absolute honor just to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Oh,
Thank you very
so
much, Casey. Appreciate it.
Great.
I'm so glad I found your work. I can't even remember how I found you guys, but I love stories like this. I just don't think there's enough voices out there telling the kinds of stories that you are telling. So I very much appreciate all the work that you have done. I can't wait to talk to you about your book today. It's going to be absolutely fabulous. So thank you so very much for all the work you do, and thank you for taking time to be on our show today.
Great. We appreciate
Glad
it.
to be here.
I just have to say, by the way, it's been a very cold winter in Salt Lake City this year, and it is now the first 65-degree day of winter, and it's sunny and nice. And so if I leave in the middle of this conversation, it's no offense. You guys just keep it going, talk amongst yourselves. I'm going to be sunbathing. No, I'm just kidding. I'm so excited to talk to you guys. My first question, and you guys are in Florida, correct?
But back and forth, actually.
Mhm.
So, but yes, we're in very rainy Cocoa Beach right now. Cocoa Beach
Okay.
is where we spend part of our time, or well, sort of most of our time, and the rest of the time close to Elko, Nevada.
Yeah, so I fly in and out of Salt Lake because it's the closest major airport.
Yeah. Gotcha. How do you like the new airport, by the way?
Oh, I love it.
So
It's
good.
probably
Pretty
best
nice, isn't it?
in the United States. Easy, convenient. It's great.
Totally. And now that they made a new tunnel underground. So for the listener, we have a brand new airport that they engineered where the old airport was. I can't believe you can build an airport and still have an operational airport in the same spot, but they did. The problem was if you had a B gate, you have to walk basically underneath all the runways, and it takes forever. It's like the Oregon Trail game where like half of your party might go missing, or like, you might need, yeah, exactly. You die of dysentery or need provisions along the way or something. But yeah, it's a really nice airport. Okay, so speaking of, that gave us a little bit of a clue. You guys are back and forth between multiple locations. How do you respond to somebody when they ask you what it is you guys do? Because I feel like it would be a very long elevator ride if you tried to explain everything that you guys have done in life and everything you have going on. It's quite a lengthy list.
That's a great question, and I struggle with answering it often. And I normally kind of just leave it short and say we have some real estate endeavors, and we look to preserve land, and we're also interested in cattle ranching.
Yes.
And just try to get it as concise as possible.
Wow, with an engineering background and all the the time that you spent as a ranger, I believe, Kevin.
I spent time in the 75th Ranger Regiment and was also a Green Beret after that. And
Wow.
About a quarter of my life doing commando stuff.
Wow, that's amazing. And Noel used to be an engineer, correct?
Yes. So I was an engineer turned investor. Well, I was an entrepreneur for many, many years and grew up businesses. And my last business, I grew it up and eventually sold it, and then turned to venture investing. And a lot of the venture investing that I've done or been involved in is with a firm called Carinaga. And we've made many investments in clean tech and things that are trying, not greenwashing, for instance, more very interested in making a serious impact, especially in the land and, and waterways. So those are kinds of the things that we wanted to talk about eventually, as we're going to talk on this podcast too. So I'm kind of an engineer, got into a little bit of environment sort of stuff, but also got interested as well in cattle too along the way. So to explain to somebody what I do is almost impossible. It's just, I follow what really excites me. And that's really what I do. And so does Kevin. And we sort of blended what we both like.
Yeah, that's amazing. Good for you guys. I want to know from both of your perspectives, as the narrative over the last few decades has really been, anti-cow in particular, these documentaries that come out that spew these numbers that are wildly inaccurate, and way overinflated. For each one of you, what has been your perspective? Like, obviously, Kevin, you've grown up around this stuff this whole time. And so when people are saying, cows are destroying the planet, every cow pasture I've ever gone to looks like some of the most beautiful land I've ever seen, where everything seems to be functioning correctly. And Noel, with you in engineering and then getting involved with cattle, what kinds of preconceived notions that you had, and what were some of the realities? I'll ask that question to each one of you.
Right. Well, I'll start. I think that's really good. And because a lot of the information, if you Google or just get on any kind of search engine and start looking for healthy nutrition, you're not going to be regularly steered towards keto, carnivore, things of positive of beef, things of positive about butter. And even myself, I went to the Naval Postgraduate School for my master's, and I wrote my master's thesis on human performance. And of course, nutrition was a big part of that. And the large part of the information I got was the lean meats, balanced diets, all sorts of rice, all sorts of other things that have to be that are largely processed. And I just kind of believed it. But I also believed in cattle ranching. I just thought, well, maybe you need to restrict beef, but we need to do this anyway. But then the more I really followed, excuse me, the science and looking at data that of real health results and seeing, wow, I think there is something to this keto thing. And like most people, that was my entry level drug. I'll start with the keto, and get the different types of various products, and going down that rabbit hole. And then the more we started to meet people and started to do more reading, I'm like, wow. And then I started to have I wasn't solving any health problems. I mean, we all have issues, but I wasn't trying to fix some drastic issue I had. I was just looking for optimal health and performance. And the more I kind of went down the keto rabbit hole, the more I found myself going into the carnivore path, because I liked the results. I liked the way I felt. My skin got better. Wasn't even trying to do that. I started recovering from workouts faster. I started just having a lot better results. And then I started to meet more people and collaborate. And as we started, I didn't know anybody who was into doing carnivore. I'd heard Joe Rogan talk. I'd heard this. Well, that sounds weird, just eating meat, but kind of liked it. And now, so I've kind of found myself really embracing it. And I don't criticize someone if they want to have a bunch of rice or a salad or eat their chicken or whatever. But I really just like eating a lot of beef, and I primarily do.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I come from a very science and engineering background, and all of us science and engineers, we love technology and data. And you find in sort of common wisdom among engineers and technologists is that if you have a problem, given, say that people have erroneously identified that cattle are a problem, right? And they're creating environmental issues, and I sort of ran into that with methane. Cows create all this methane that supposedly is the problem, even though, a lot of people haven't really thought about almost 100 million bison and elk that used to live here, so what happened with that methane? But let's go back to that and say, oh, all right, so we have this problem with methane, we have a problem with carbon sinks and all these issues, and nobody is really thinking about it as an overall system, and one that sort of wraps its arms around and embraces what we might have already been doing. So things in the past that we're already doing. So, these are things, well, all of us engineers just leave the past behind, because obviously everything new that we're doing has got to be better. And it's the same in our medical industry. We've had a lot of advances in, say, disease prevention or disease care that has been maybe misplaced for chronic diseases, so you have infectious diseases versus chronic diseases where, things, we've made leaps and bounds through technology. And as an engineer, I appreciate that. But, solving the issues of chronic disease with technology and drugs and pharmaceuticals really leaves behind things that we already know as a species for maybe, a few million years. So, and these things are sort of like, as a technologist, I had to back off of wanting to take lots of data, invent new things, create new devices, new pharmaceuticals, et cetera. And especially you get really happy about that and get really excited about that as a venture capitalist, because you want to invest in companies that are developing new technologies. But instead, how can you embrace what already exists on this earth and in this world? So I think that's where I really started to latch on to things that are all right. If you want to clean up the soil and the water, how about you use something that's already there, like animals and insects and things that you don't want to harm, you want to actually incorporate in your quote unquote technology. So does that answer your question? I hope that was kind of
Absolutely.
long-winded, but
No, it's
yeah.
fascinating. It's such an interesting point of view to be able to, again, you know, in an engineering mind, you want to find the technologies and the new things, but you tend to kind of forget some of the old things that we've always had. So I really think that perspective is very interesting. I'm listening to a podcast episode right now, a very, very popular one. Most people would know it, and it's all about insulin resistance. And I'm only about an hour in, and they have like barely made a flyby on nutrition, and they're talking a lot about genetics and different pharma and new things that are coming out. And I just want to like throw my phone. It's so ridiculous. It's like the main
So
thing you could
easy.
possibly do for insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. And they're
Yeah.
getting into the sticks of these new medications and all this other stuff.
Oh,
And
yeah.
genes, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and even outside the medication thing, if you ask a general person on the street, well, hey, I really want to get healthier. Oh, why don't you go down to GNC? They just got this great new product in a purple box. And you're going to go down there and nothing bad on GNC. I'm sure it's better than a lot of crap you buy in the grocery store, but still, it's just a bunch of chemicals and crap.
Yeah.
But I used to like, I asked the question, I want to be a healthy athlete. Okay, well, you should be using these supplements and that, and this powder and this pill. And I listened to the people I respected, and I did that. And I find I'm much better without it. And just drinking water, having salt, and eating meat.
And I love that. For all the work over the years, I've tried so hard to get GNC to be a sponsor. We just lost them as a potential sponsor. Thanks a lot. No, I agree. Like I used to take tons of supplements myself because that's what you do for performance. And the more I started questioning, like, well, why am I even taking this? You realize, like, best case scenario, you're just wasting your money. You know what I mean? Like, and it can cause a lot of side effects. I will say, I feel optimistic when I'm talking to people, strangers. More people than ever now know about keto and carnivore. More people than ever are aware or maybe smell a rat, like the latest headline that had the picture of steaks and said like replacing plant-based protein for or taking out animal protein and replacing with plant-based protein will give you a 20% less chance of dementia or something. The comments from the general public are like more on the side of pro meat, which is really nice to see. And I really enjoyed an interview I watched with you guys with one of your friends in Florida who is a little bit more into music, but even she admitted that she's working with a nutritionist and they're trying to get more steak into her diet. She's quite enjoying that. And she always kind of had the assumption that that was bad for her. So I do feel like, at least optimistically that things are changing. It's just slow.
They are. It is slow.
That is slow. And the proof is out there that not doing it works. I was very healthy for most of my life, and I ate a bunch of bread, I ate a bunch of chicken, I ate a bunch of not a lot of steak, maybe a couple times a week, and I ate a lot of eggs, and dairy products, but I was doing a lot of the things that aren't optimal, and I was still succeeding. I just find it a little more optimal now.
Yeah. Well said. I really like that. I feel the same way about the things that I'm eating now. Okay, so let's talk about the book itself. I have not gotten a chance to read it yet. I'm very much looking forward to it. I was able to read the free sample on Amazon where you talked about family and some of the health issues that we also mentioned in the introduction. I think it's really relatable. I'm really glad that you started out that way to share that personal story. But would you mind kind of talking to the listener about the personal stories that you guys were noticing with health that maybe was the nexus of this book?
Yeah, it was primarily my family. And, Kevin says, oh, we go along and we're pretty healthy and we don't have these chronic issues. We're pretty young not very young, but, but, compared to our parents' age.
I don't get discounts on matinees yet.
But, a lot of these chronic health issues, and I'll go through two of them. One of them can impact you when you're young. And another is really not going to affect you until you start getting into your 60s and 70s. And insulin resistance can really kind of hit you like a hammer. and where you don't know what hits you. And so, and it happened in my family with my father. And my father, he's also an engineer, and he's a robotics engineer. And I kind of grew up working together with him, and we're always solving problems together. Well, my dad was also an avid tennis player, and he would play tennis all the time. And so he was pretty healthy because he was so active. He played 5 days a week. He played on all of his, so it helped him to keep blood moving through his body, his circulation, his brain, etc. But he was loading up on carbohydrates his whole life. And he struggled with weight for many, many, many years. And then in the middle of a tennis game, he just dropped. He almost died on the tennis court, and none of us really knew that he had the worst case of raging type 2 diabetes that anybody had seen. And they were like, we can't even believe he didn't just die because it was so bad. And so all of a sudden, then this litany of, where he was running around on a tennis court. One day he was 72, I think, when this happened to him. He was in his 70s when this happened. So he was healthy, running around, maybe a little overweight, but happy and everything. And then all of a sudden, just almost dead. And this happens too with people with a heart attack, right? They're just all of a sudden they have a heart attack they didn't know. So, and my dad never went to the doctor for 40 years or something. And so we all sort of ganged up on him, and also he ganged up on himself, because now he's injecting himself with insulin, et cetera. He doesn't like it. And he had to have all these surgeries because he had a host of other problems because of all the crazy foods that he was eating, giving him kidney stones and impacting just the whole system of his body. And he's
following his doctor's advice.
Yeah,
he's just been following. Like, what should I do? Oh, okay, eat a little less of that,
and cereal, like keep eating whole grain cereal, right? And so I kind of got onto him because I have been so low carbohydrate for about 20 years myself. So
wow.
So I really have been that way, and I've been very anti-sugar with my 2 children. And really just with anybody that I'm a little preachy about.
We were both into eating the traditional clean and healthy way, which would involve white rices and lots of vegetables and lots of ranch dressings and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but I was very anti-sugar, and I was very concerned when my dad got diabetes. And I said, look, it's very simple, just like you said. You want to stop the insulin resistance, you've got to stop the carbohydrates and sugar. You have to stop it. And so we kind of got him to that point. But the 50 or so, or maybe 60 years of him ingesting these processed foods and all these carbohydrates, not only did he have diabetes, but then within a few years, he was also diagnosed with Parkinson's. And so these 2 very, very debilitating diseases have been, and my dad is staying with us right now. Actually, I just dropped him off at the house, because he now, and again, he went from running around on a tennis court to barely being able to get in and out of a car within a few years. And I believe that Parkinson's and Alzheimer's are also triggered by insulin resistance as well. And I believe that these debilitating diseases are not addressed soon enough, and they can become these chronic diseases. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, and started writing about it and said, Dad, you've got to do this. And so I signed up my dad later on for Dr. Chafee's How to Carnivore. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's basically where you do Q&A and all that sort of thing. So I've just been like taking over my dad's health issues. And then on I said there were 2 there. It can affect you when you're older. It can affect you when you're younger. But I just read, I'm sure you probably read this book. It's Dr. Georgia Ede's book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind.
So good. So good.
So good. So my daughter has had some, some issues with anxiety and depression, and many of her friends have also had these issues, and they always turn to pharmaceuticals, or your therapist always turns you to the pharmaceuticals. But what you find is those have such horrific side effects. And if you could just tweak that diet to getting more red meat, more sunlight, more fat in their diet, and get them away from the processed foods and the carbohydrates, then they can really rebuild their brain, and supply their brain with what they need. So, through all of this, through this book, it started with the health. But then when it expands to not just human health, but the health of our land and agriculture. And I think what I found with reading a lot of the carnivore books, was there wasn't a lot of merging of those two things. So I wanted to make sure that message got out to the public. There are a lot of really good ranching and earth books as well, like Cow and Earth, but I think merging those is kind of where we went. So
yeah, and I had to take the city girl out to the cattle ranch to make sure she liked it, and if we would be a good fit when we started dating some odd many years ago, a decade or so. And I would always make the argument that I was not into the keto carnivore thing, say 10 years ago, but I would make the argument that look at this land, look at where the cows are. And you mentioned it, Casey, like this doesn't look like it's bad for the environment. It looks beautiful and pristine. It looks like it did probably 150, 200, 500 years ago. It looks, there's a fence here, but the next fence line isn't for another 2 miles.
Mhm.
And I always thought this is so crazy to say that this is destroying the planet, because it absolutely is not. And just for the record, I'm a cow calf producer, meaning that I breed the cows, they get a baby, we get the baby weaned, and they get sold off to a stocker where they go grow for another year, and then they end up in a feedlot, and then they end up in a packing plant.
Gotcha. Yeah, wow. It's so awesome. The last time I bought a quarter cow, it was from a guy in the middle of nowhere in Nevada. And you see the pictures, and it is absolutely gorgeous. They live in a place where, like, if a car drives down the dirt road, they're like, what's going on out there? You know what I mean? Like, the kids that they have, I think they have 4 or 5 kids now, and the kids are the most mild-mannered, kind, amazing, attentive kids I've ever met in my entire life. And they just eat cream and their amazing grass-fed beef and all that stuff. Noel, I was just thinking, you were saying for you, it's super obvious that metabolic health is at the core of things like mental disease. Just to say, the expert that was interviewed who studied insulin resistance for 50 years now, in this podcast I was telling you about, is not convinced of that. He was asked about type 3 diabetes and dementia, and he's like, yeah, I don't want to put words in his mouth. He's like, I don't know if that's actually true. It blows my mind. It absolutely just blows my mind. It's crazy.
Yeah,
It's not taught in med schools. It's not taught, free range cows do not buy wings at hospitals or med schools or pay for any textbooks.
Yeah, good point. It's crazy. Yeah. Okay. Well, the framework of the book I quite like, and especially in the title where you talk about food, farming, and pharma. And I think that provides a nice kind of framework that we can talk about. Well, what were some of the more interesting things that you learned about the food production in the company, or I'm sorry, in our country? Like what is it that ails us? Is it simply all the ultra processed foods, or how deep does that story go?
You go to the aquifers and the pesticides, because I don't think people really know that.
Well, what I tried to do was, so we live in Florida part of the year, obviously, and so I'll go for the jugular, and the first big bad wolf that I think is existing, and that is sugar. So we have sugarcane in Florida. There's quite a bit of sugarcane agriculture in Florida. And it's one of these things we call monocrops. So what that means is you can imagine rows and rows and rows and rows and rows marching on for as far as you can see for 50 miles.
So something that never was there 100 years ago.
Right, exactly. And it's something very, and when you go and look at it, it's just this disturbing monotony where there can't be anything else. There must only be this one thing. And so I kind of started with, and really what I picked on was not tomatoes or something else that's grown, which, some of that agriculture is pretty bad too, because of pesticides and herbicides that they put on the soil. But when you go into monocrop agriculture and you look at sugar, corn, soy, and wheat, which that all of those four. So I wanted to pick, and I'm kind of an 85% person. So I wanted to look at what is the 85% of the damage that we have done to our country's land. And it's like 150 million acres of land that was once roamed freely buffalo and elk, or well, sorry, bison and
snakes,
elk.
rodents, animals,
Yeah.
insects, birds, the whole ecosystem.
Right, this biodiversity and this whole ecosystem, and these beautiful waterways that basically fed these areas, especially in the Great Plains, right? They have been completely taken over by this monocrop agriculture and irrigation that we force on that land. And so what we do is we hose the crap out of it with really billions and billions of chemicals that are herbicides and pesticides. And I go through this in the book just to give you all the data, because it's available through the USDA. And this is sort of to refute the environmental argument that vegetables are good for you, or that plants are good for you. Plants are not that good for you if you have to grow them in bulk. They're really bad. They're bad for the world, because you're basically ripping out every single thing that once was in that soil, and you are putting in something artificial
that's genetically engineered to tolerate the pesticides and insecticides and all those herbicides and all those things.
Right. And so, and, you can start with sugar, you talk about corn, and I talk about all these movies that I saw. There's one called Big Sugar, there's one called King Corn, and they're very eye-opening when you start to see the amazing takeover of these plants of our land, and what we have to do to keep them alive every year.
Billions of gallons, billions with a B,
Yeah.
of poison that was developed to kill people largely during World War I and World War II, that is now dumped on all this. And to tell me that it's not going to have any impact on our waterways, our ecosystem, or our health when we're consuming these things.
Yeah. So I would say monocrop agriculture, and I personally avoid anything with any of those products. I boycott them. I think that wheat is bad for your brain and bad for your body. And I think it's horrible for our environment. I think that corn is really bad for both, as well as sugar and soy.
Well, one caveat to say is I do think there is an argument that could be made for perennial wheats, perennial types of foods. And if you look at the obesity rates throughout Europe, where they don't have the big mass monocrop stuff, you do not have the problems that we have. So, and you look at corn. Corn is not edible today off the stalk, the typical corn, which also didn't exist 100 years ago. It exists now in mass, and we turn it into gasoline or ethanol. But still, it's not things have changed dynamically, and we can't even eat the food without significant processing that we're growing for America to be healthy.
Yeah,
except for cows.
Yeah. So that was sort of the food. And the thing is, as an engineer, you just ask a lot of questions. You go to your cereal aisle and you pick up some Raisin Bran. Just how many carbohydrates and how much sugar is in this thing? And how do they actually make this stuff? Like, how long does it take to make a flake? And if you go through, I think it's either the Department of Health or somewhere, they actually have something like a 25-page instruction set of how this mechanically processed flake, just a flake, is conducted. And you're like, this is good for me somehow? I don't think so. So
wow, that's
anyhow.
crazy. You mentioned the pesticides. This was pointed out to me recently. I just hosted the authors of Why Vegans Have Smaller Brains, and they made a point. I know they did that title on purpose.
So
very provocative. But they made a point that I had not considered, and you guys would be the perfect people to ask, because you guys do drive across the country quite a bit. You mentioned all these pesticides and all this stuff that they spray on the crops. Do you notice that your windshield has significantly less bugs as you're driving across the country than it used to? Like, do you ever need to stop at a gas station and clean off your windshield the way that you used to?
Well, it still happens, but it's more so in the winter when it's just coming off the snowy roads, and now less so for the insects as far as cleaning the windshield. But I forgot the statistic, but it's something like like I'll just throw a number that's probably not completely correct. 70% of all insects that were around 50 years ago are now extinct. Now don't quote me on the number, but it's a significant amount of insects that we're losing daily, and people just don't care about that. But what else are we losing with that?
Right, right. And we want to preserve. Yeah, we want to preserve all these birds and the rodents,
and the birds are eating the stuff. The insects that are almost dying from this poison that we're giving them, that was made to kill people in gas chambers and killing fields in war, and they're eating that, and then we're eating part of them, and then I don't even think we know the half of how bad this is.
Well, you bring up a good point too, because a lot of these chemicals that we're using on all of our in all of our agriculture were sort of grandfathered in to our U.S. food system well before we had any rules or inspections or testing. And so since we've been doing it for, X amount of years, let's say 60 years ago, and since we've had it in there, we obviously it's fine and they're grandfathered in. There are some loopholes there.
Well, modern wheat was made without any FDA oversight, and it was done for good reason. It was done to increase the yield and make a shorter, fatter stock so that they could increase it. And then it was also done to fight food insecurity. And that's not a bad thing to strive for. But then when you genetically alter it to fight off insecticides and different herbicides and do all that, and now we're starting to ask a lot of questions. And also you increase the yield. Well, what did that do? That just drained a whole bunch of water out of the soil that wasn't naturally designed in that, wherever it came from, in that ecosystem to be pulled out of the ground. And one of the things, that I think we look at the carbon footprint and people like to attack cows with methane, and even though methane doesn't stay in the atmosphere anywhere near as long as carbon, but what have you, but we don't ask the question of, well, how do we get these gases out of our atmosphere? Well, you need to sequester them into the soil. But if you're tilling hundreds and thousands of acres across the plains where we used to be able to sequester all of this carbon into the soil, and there are pictures of building houses out of the thick mud that used to come out of those plains. And then we dried it up with tilling. A great dust bowl happened, depression happened. And then what do we learn? Well, we learned that what we can do is till it and put a whole bunch of chemicals and
water
and water on it. And we can just use that top little bit, which still is not sequestering carbon or any kind of toxic gases.
It's good strategy. We're doing good here on planet Earth. Yeah.
And the reasons were good. Well, there's a lot of corporate greed everywhere, but the reasons really were not bad reasons. And we're just trying to figure it out and playing whack-a-mole.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I love the point you made earlier that often gets missed. There is a complete difference between a perennial plant and an annual plant. They have totally different uses and strategies on where to live. And you see those pictures of just feet and feet and feet of roots of these perennials that are allowed to bring water and resources down and cycle it back up and all that stuff, and we just don't have that. So yeah, you mentioned all the chemical processing that goes into all of this food production. You guys write about seed oils, which is another kind of absolutely disgusting thing to put in your body. So I'm so glad you wrote about that and all those processes. I do have a question that I get asked all the time in regards to food. It's already something that you mentioned, Kevin, which is the feedlot. How do you look at the difference between grain finished cows versus grass finished cows? For most of our audience are already kind of pro, keto carnivore listening in. What do you tell people if somebody asks, like, well, do I have to do grass fed, grass finished? Do I have to buy from a rancher? Like, how do you explain that to people?
That's a great question, and I don't have a straight answer on it, but I'll give you one portion of the answer first, which is you can't tell me that ruminant animals with hoofs that roam the plains never ate grains, because grains naturally occur. So you can't give me that argument and say that they never were meant to do this. Well, they probably weren't meant to sit in a feedlot and have this ultra processed grain. I'll go by that, but you can't tell me they couldn't have grain. The next thing is let's go into the methane argument. I'm making a little bit of argument for grain here, and I personally think that the jury is out, and we need to look more and how can we do grass finished a little better. But so if you look at, like, the longer that cow is alive, there are statistics that show that they put off some methane gas, and they take a lot of time, and they're economically challenging to raise for several years. If you try to grain finish them, you can finish that animal in about 2 years. If you try to grass finish them, you're adding about a year. And that's a lot of time and a lot of money that'll get passed on to the consumer. And you need to do that because you can't fatten them enough on grass, particularly lower non-supplemented. And I'm not, and I, now a different argument is, where are you getting the most healthy product that you as a consumer can put in your body? And I think largely, as you're looking at grass finish, you're going to get a healthier product. It may not be as fat, you may not have the marbling with that nice, really tender cut, but you're going to probably have a lot less toxic chemicals that were put in all sorts of things and processed stuff that animal ate, which is now not going to get passed on to you. But I also think, it takes to finish an animal. You're looking at, you're going to have them in a freezer and age them when they're what's called on the rail, and you have a carcass in there, and they're going to basically be aging somewhere between 35 and 40 days, and maybe a little shorter in some scenarios, and they're going to be at a certain temperature, we'll just say 38 degrees. And we've kind of dialed that in as an industry over the line for mass production, not what we like to see, the thousands of animals being slaughtered a day in these places that look like hell. But when we've learned to do that, and we've learned what the consumer wanted, but now we have this niche of this grass finished that's coming up and gaining popularity. But considering each of these animals takes 2 years, and you're dialing in the last little bit with these last little things, I think the jury's out. And to really what kind of grass, can we use some protein supplementation? Can we do things to increase the marbling? Because every time you start the experiment, you got at least 2 years and sometimes 3 to finish with that animal.
So one other thing, I didn't mean to interrupt, but one other thing that Kevin and I both have been really exploring and very interested in terms of grass finishing is where you can't have the fodder grown because you don't have the water resources, you don't have the proper temperatures, etc. Because of an investment that we made in my investment firm that I was part of, we made investments in hydroponic vertical farming for people food, but translating that into something that would be made for food for cows.
We're exploring that now with like barley fodder, which has a high protein similar to alfalfa, is probably considered grass by whoever the grass-fed finished stamp person is, which that is another thing that's not defined. People say, I want unprocessed grass finished. Well, you know what? There's no big lobby right now that you get a stamp on it. There's a USDA, and it's that select choice or prime. But you don't get that. And so I would like to see that kind of merge, and it leads down another rabbit hole of the beef industry, which I'm a part of. And we just finished CattleCon this year, which is 8,500 people and a great event. But they know nothing about this keto carnivore world that's promoting beef. And it's just like, well, why are you passing ships in the night? Why are you not talking? Because you're both into the same thing, but you're not interested in each other. And I was like, and I'm really trying to, through the beef industry and through the NCBA and Angus Association, to try to raise awareness from the beef industry and also from carnivore keto folks that we're friends with.
Yeah, no, I'm friends with Dr. Peter Ballerstad, and I've had him on the show a few times, and we talked last year about exactly that. Like, he's going to low carb conferences and he goes to agronomy conferences, and like he keeps saying, like, you guys need to talk because you cow producers think you're producing something unhealthy. All of you could benefit from eating more of your own product, and you need to talk to the keto carnivore people, and they really want to talk to you. So, okay. So what I gathered from that was a very thoughtful answer, and I really appreciate that you mentioned trade-offs. There are always trade-offs, and it's not just gas. It could be land. It could be water. That time that you mentioned is a huge thing. A year more of resources for the same animal that might have a little bit less fat. And I'll give you a good example of this. This week, I'm very grateful. Our freezer is completely full. One of my wife's clients brought her over boxes of grass-fed cow that she had ordered, and she just did not want it anymore. Why didn't she want it? The taste. The taste is a little strong and it's very grassy. So she gave it away to us. My wife gave away one box. We filled our freezer with the other box. We cooked up a roast the other day. It's pretty strong. It's pretty gamey and grassy, and it's fine. But I also went to a warehouse store that was selling a New York strip that's about this big. I got it for $100. I sliced it up into 1.25 inch steaks. They gave me 15 steaks, conventionally raised, great price, and they are delicious. They are so good. And I can eat that every single day, where I just don't necessarily have the taste for grass-fed. So it sounds like we're on the same page as far as like, I would tell anybody, buy whatever meat that you enjoy, that you like, and you can afford. I think with ruminant agriculture, the difference in nutrition is maybe like a tiny bit different. And I just think with all the other trade-offs you have, to tell somebody that you need to go to Whole Foods, another show sponsor we're losing here, and buy the most expensive cuts of meat that are grass-fed, grass-finished, I think we're doing a disservice by telling people that.
Yeah, I'll quote Life by Jake. He's on Instagram. Great guy. He's a coach. He had a great comment that I'm giving him credit here, but I love to tell it to people. He's all, you can cure diabetes with hot dogs from the supermarket. And I'm like, you know what? I tell everything I've read. I think you're totally right. I think I don't want to just eat hot dogs, but I think it would work.
Yep, I agree. No, I love that. Jake is awesome. I got to hang out with him in Austin. He's a great guy. But yeah, I completely agree here. I just heard about cultures like, living in Okinawa, Japan, and after the war in the 70s, and they were eating tons of spam, but they didn't have the same like metabolic disease that is increasing around the world. So I think that's a great point, and I love that you make that point. So we've talked a bit about food. Let's talk about the farming. What are some misconceptions around the raising of agriculture, in particular cow farming? Pros and cons.
So, well, let's go back to I'll just give one more point to the grass finished. As I'm a producer, and we do production cattle, which is I only really sell by the semi truck. And we don't have I want to go farm to table.
Maybe you talk about the phases. So
yeah, I think
phases,
I will.
Yeah.
But I'll get into that. But real quick, what I'll say is, in order for me to use the land that I have available, and if I were to go to grass finished, I would have to decrease my herd size dramatically. Basically, I would have to cut a third of them off and raise them longer. And now my profit margin just went way down. Now, are there other pullers and levers and things like that? Yes. So I do. So that's a hard thing to really do right. But getting into what Noel's point is, a lot of folks don't really understand the feedlots and the way these things work. And I mentioned it briefly earlier, but one of the cattle industry, a lot of folks look at it like, oh, they see the feedlots and like, oh, that's bad. Look at all those thousands and thousands of cattle. And I'm not making an argument for them. But what I will say is a lot of the industry is controlled in a very negative way by what's called the Big Four. And that's Carhill, Tyson, American Beef, and missing one.
National Beef.
And National Beef.
And JBS.
And JBS, yeah. So those are the Big Four. And they control 85% of all beef that is sold and processed in the United States.
And two of them are foreign.
Yeah, they're foreign entities. And because of the size of that market, they are able to basically price control. And there's, in my opinion, there's a lot of corporate greed up there that really kind of dictates it, because you have a lot of very wealthy people at the top of those huge organizations. I mean, you could just imagine the CEO of Tyson's probably is doing okay, I'm guessing. But it's hard to find a family farm or ranch where they're not struggling. In fact, my grandfather, who started our cattle ranch, he said, "You go get a real job, because you need to weather a couple seasons if there's drought or anything, because no one's going to be here to protect you. And so if you want this to sustain, you need to find other income sources to come in." And sadly, I think he's right in a lot of ways. And I'm trying to change that, but it's slow and it goes on. But then, so we got these Big Four things, and what they kind of control a lot of the way we work. Their lobbies in Congress are huge, and they're very, very, very powerful. And they set the way things do, such as transporting food across state line and doing all that. And you mentioned buying a quarter cow. And the only way you can really effectively do that now is you do these little co-ops where, hey, you got 4 people, they're just going to buy a quarter of this cow. And then you can't, me as a producer, I can't sell you a hamburger. You have to have a USDA inspector there. You have to pay for their office, make sure they have all the ADA compliance issues for wheelchairs and life insurance, and especially it's very expensive and prohibitive. So, but what you can do is I can sell, hey, you and you, I'm going to sell you this cow as a portion, and then it's effectively yours. And then you say, hey, now I think I got a good idea where I could butcher it. And you're just along for the ride. Okay, well, sure, you're butchering this, and you're scratching it. I don't know. Okay, what am I? But it has to be your decision, because you now own the cow and they're controlling the process. But it's the only way you can really skirt that those regulations that are federal and state and different from state to state. But now going back to the way that the business works, so you have generally a cow calf producer like it's me, and you raise teenage cows, and you sell primarily steers, where you're going to sell some heifers, and they'll go off on a semi truck and they'll end up somewhere where there's brighter pastures. A lot of ours go to California, or some go to Nebraska, and they go to a stalker. They're in a stalker for about a year where they just get fat, and they live a wonderful life out on a beautiful pasture, and they're largely left alone. Then they go to the feedlot. And so you see these pictures of these feedlots, which do not look good, and they're largely controlled by those big four. And they don't look that pretty, and they don't look comfortable, but the cow is really only there about a month or maybe a little longer. Yeah, it's a really spending a very, 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 very limited time of their life there. And then they go to the packing plant and turn into hamburger and what have you. But that's, I think Noel just wanted to, because a lot of people don't understand how the whole process sequentially works.
Yeah, why couldn't you buy a cow from
I can't sell
you can't.
I'm a cattle rancher. I can't sell you a cow.
Yeah, because they have
so bizarre.
Yeah, they have to go through the rest of the process that's dictated kind of by the overarching meat
all industry. The rules, title code, this, that, C-section, whatever. It's like,
yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. There's the one feedlot that everybody talks about that's in California, and it's right next to like a highway, and so tons of people pass it. And I think everybody just gets the idea that this is what raising cows is like, when that's just not the case.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It's not. Well, it's obviously, I can't tell you your eyes are lying, but that's not where most of those cattle live most of their life. Most of the vast 80 to 90% of their life, they were being left alone by humans, probably somewhere you couldn't even see a car, and doing their cow thing.
Wow.
Yeah, well, the argument for the feedlots, I'd like to see it come down to more local consumer oriented and knowing where your food comes. I'd like to see and I think there's some trends that are happening, but I'd like to see the beef industry switch more to that and make it a doable thing. Because right now there's the closest plant to me, as I'm looking at trying to go farm to table, for at least a portion of our herd. But it looks like I'm going to have to ship these animals somehow to Idaho. I'm going to have to do things out there. I'm going to have to get them cut up, and I'm going to have to bring them back and have them packaged somewhere in Nevada. I'm talking lots of logistics, and it's very cumbersome. And okay, how can I make this financially viable and give a healthy product to consumers that want it? And we're moving, and we're hoping to be there at least this year, and do things like jerky that you could make easier packaged and make it a little easier, and start to figure these logistical chains out to get our friends a better product. But anyway, it's hard.
That's a tremendous amount of work and energy and resource that you have to do all of those different steps. And so that does sound very challenging. And I really appreciate the conversation around like the raising of cows. Is it nearly as energy expensive as a lot of people talk about, or again, the numbers that you hear in Cowspiracy or whatever, like for water use, land use? What are some things that people just simply don't know, like the normal person walking around wouldn't know about raising a cow?
Transport is very interesting the way it works now, and it's the most efficient way we've been able to do it. But to me, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I really like the topic that Noel brought up about bringing in vertical farmings and getting other ways that you can get and the thing about the vertical farmings too is you're not going to have insecticides. You can control the environment, and you can control the output of the products that you're very quickly like, hey, we need to ramp up production by 50% by tomorrow. Okay, flip the switch and ramp it up. And you're just dealing with water and nutrients, and not dealing with chemicals or herbicides or pesticides, and it's enclosed, so you're not worried about a lot of these things. But it is very intensive, and until we can kind of figure out as a larger industry those solutions. Right now, the way it works is you ship the beef. So I told you about the cow calf, the stalker, and the feedlots, and then often there's a packer involved that's not even the same location as this feedlot, and you're sending these huge animals that weigh as much each as a family of 4, and you're sending them by hundreds of thousands in trucks.
Yeah,
and that's expensive. That's a lot of fuel. That's a lot of weight. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of unneeded stress on the animal.
You lose a lot of these animals along the way.
You lose a lot, and when we sell them, when they get on the truck, we get paid for the weight, but we get automatically it varies a little bit. We'll say a 3% reduction, because we know that they're going to shrink. It's a shrink weight, and they're going to get on that truck, and they're not going to be the same animal. But I got a grass, I got pasture. Why can't I do everything right here? But you can't.
Right, because of the way it is. But
Mhm.
but as Kevin said, we're really looking into doing that on his ranch in Nevada, and then quite possibly doing that in Florida too, where we have plenty of sun and ability to grow vertical farms and things
Which it
like
would
that.
require in Florida. An interesting thing about Florida, grass everywhere, but the
Mhm.
protein content, because of the high water levels, is really low. So you like
Oh,
finishing a cow in Florida would take infinitely longer than a lot of other places, and you wouldn't
wow.
you unless you supplement.
Right.
You would have to supplement with protein or grain
Which you
or
could
Fascinating.
grow, you could potentially hydroponically grow that. So we're looking into ways that we could do that in a good in harmony with the land sort of approach. And that's where I was talking a little bit about, I was dissing my own technology, but it's a way that if you utilize technology and you use it in harmony with land, it can be very effective and if you think about the overall system, right, you're transporting these animals 1,000 miles here, 1,000 miles there. That just seems like a dumb system, right? So what is a way where you can keep it in one place and do this farm to table thing?
we had key ranches end up in Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah, we started them in
Yeah, that's right.
they were a really neat solution that is coming. This surprises a lot of people, is Walmart.
Uh-huh.
Walmart. So I mentioned the big four. Well, it would take someone like Walmart to have any kind of reasonable competition with the big four, and they successfully did. And they created a brand called Prime Pursuits that goes around and buys high quality beef, and they bought ours a few years ago. And then they go and they turn them into stockers under a venue called 44 Farms. And then they pack them and sell them, and they do their closed system as best as I can understand it. And so they are not part of the big four. And then they package it and they sell it under McLaren Farms, but they were only able to stock it in some 800 stores across the country. But talking to the logistical thing, so our cows, they're like, oh, okay, they came here and they came to Florida. And in fact, there's one Walmart about 30 minutes from our house that they were the inn. So I don't
Wow.
but that's just like, why are you raising cattle in Nevada and driving across the Rocky Mountains and doing all this stuff with, like, that's just a lot of movement when it's really, and there's people that need to eat in Nevada. Why? Like, why do we do all this crisscross of these gigantic animals?
Yeah.
So interesting. I remember a Brian Regan bit that he did maybe like 20 years ago where he's like, do you ever see trucks of logs pass each other on the freeway? And why are they like, well, you had logs over there? Why didn't they just get the logs over there? It makes no sense. And when you're thinking again about the carbon cycle and methane, the difference between a cow and methane production that comes from grass degenerating anyway versus like what you're describing, that's tons of carbon. That's a totally different thing to talk about.
What about all the diesel fuel? No one's talking, and
Totally.
that's their argument against the beef industry. Why are you expending so much diesel fuel to put hamburger on the table? It's a fair argument.
But it's
Wow.
just the logistics. It's not inherent in the system.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, it doesn't
like
have to
the
be that way.
logs. Then why do we got logs going? Why do we
Yeah.
got beef going every which direction?
Should have called each other first. I do want to talk also about what you guys have learned about the pharmaceutical industry and how that's part of the story as well.
Yeah, I would love to talk about statins.
I'll lead off because Noel's got she's got the engineer science things, but one of the things that this was a hard thing for me to kind of crack, because my family on my father's side are mostly attorneys and cattle ranchers, and on my mother's side they're all doctors, and they all kind of subscribe to whatever they were taught in medical school. And I think all of these, from my grandfather to my uncle to my cousin, these are wonderful humans that I really appreciate. And then we start learning about the medical industry, and I'm like, some of this stuff you're pushing isn't all that good. And I do think I think doctors are wonderful. I think the medical industry is largely wonderful. They're not totally wrong with pharmaceuticals. If you have a cold or a cough, they're pretty good at fixing that. But if you have any of these modern Western ailments, Parkinson's, leukemia, different types of other cancers, all these issues, I don't think we're winning that war in the medical industry, and I think Noel can probably go in a lot more into that.
Well, I mean, I think again, I'm like this 85% person, and when I found out that my dad was taking statins, I just lost it. I was so upset about it because I didn't know, and he was put, and he was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and there are some other people in our family too that we've said, look, you've got to cut these things out. But for older, first of all, I have high cholesterol. I will admit that and put my glaring red lab results in front of you. I believe that cholesterol is one of the most important things you can have in your body. Our cell walls everywhere in our body are made of cholesterol, and in our brain, which is only a very small portion of the weight of our body, the majority of it is fat and cholesterol. And so this, obviously you read Dr. Georgia Ead's book, and the drumbeat of these doctors who have a great head on their shoulders, okay, pun very much intended, they stress the importance of having animal products and fats in your body always, and trying desperately not to let them leave, because you need them in order to survive. And we have been grilled, really, with my generation, with this low fat litany, where sugar is fine, but you can't have any fat in your diet, which has really, really put a hurting on us from a perspective of not just insulin resistance, but also limiting the fats that are going to our brains. And adding on top of that, something that deliberately takes cholesterol away from the mechanisms of your body and your brain is horrible. I think it's tragic. And, I don't know what that could potentially do to all of your neurotransmitters, as a young person as well. So, but from reading Dr. Georgia Ead's book, it can affect almost all of them, as well as your sex hormones too. And especially at the crucial time when you're growing up, that can really affect you. So statins aren't introduced typically until someone's much older and they get a diagnosis like I have. I have cholesterol that's at least over 300. And other people would be like, oh my God, put that girl on it. She's going to have a heart attack any second. But luckily, I had a doctor in my case that said, all right, it's blinking red, so let's check you out. And they checked out the size of my LDL particles, and they also did a calcium screening on my arteries and heart. And my LDL came back with very large, fluffy particles, which is good. They're not going to be sticking anywhere because they're too large and fluffy. And my calcium score at my age, which even though you say I'm 28, I'm older than that by a significant degree. And, but I have a calcium score of 0, which I expected, and puts me in the clear, even though I have ragingly high cholesterol. But it's because I believe, and many of these other doctors believe, that cholesterol is vital to your brain and vital to the rest of your body as well. So when my dad told me, my doctor told me that I need to be on statins, I said, Dad, you just got diagnosed with Parkinson's. You do not need to be taking cholesterol away from your precious brain. Get off the statins. And it took me about 6 months to convince him, and I mean, just yelling at him. And we've also yelled at quite a few of our other family members, because we believe that for these elderly people, the
brain is over 75% cholesterol.
Yeah,
statins inhibit the processing of cholesterol by your body.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
What are you doing?
What are you doing to your mind?
What are you doing? And so this was one of the biggest things for me. I also have a beef to pick with or bone to pick with mental health pharmaceuticals as well. I think that they have some pretty horrific side effects, especially for adolescents and teens. SSRIs are even in our water supply everywhere because everybody is using them. And I believe that depression and and anxiety and even bipolar the journal articles and the studies are coming in to really point toward a lack of red meat and a lack of fat in the diets of our youth. And that is really causing them some serious mental anguish. And that, if we could just feed people properly, that's what I think is really exciting. Now, I'm also kind of a glass half full person and a rosy colored glasses person. What I believe we should be doing as our next generation future GNC is tailoring the nutrition profile. So you say you don't like, grass-fed beef, but what if we could tailor the nutrition profile of your cow to have all of the fatty acids that you need, and all the delicious, the good tasting profile that you want, as well, to deliver to you the optimal in terms of an experience for eating as well as for living, and providing you with great nutrition. So I'm excited about those things, but I am not a fan of statins or SSRIs.
Thank you so very much for explaining that. I could not agree more. And you mentioned studies and adolescents, and it's also like, these are stories, like these are people. When I go to a conference, I'll hang out with my friends Matt and Robin was bipolar for most of her life and medicated, and describes watching her life revolve around her. Her daughter they were all featured in the cholesterol code video that promoted at Dave Feldman's conference a few weeks ago, and I got to see them. And their 17-year-old daughter was asked, what memories do you have of your mom? She felt terrible about this afterwards, but she said, like, I really don't have a lot of memories of my mom. Like, she was around, but she wasn't alert and awake. And then they found metabolic psychiatry, they found ketogenic diets and no sugar, no grain, and they go on this, and she demedicates herself from everything, and now she's able to participate in life. And she's same, just like you, a lean mass hyper responder that has a cholesterol profile that looks terrible to most people, but thank God for engineers like yourself and journalists who ask questions, and engineers like Dave Feldman, who's doing this amazing research. I know you guys have met Sean Baker. He does this at conferences frequently. So I'm not sure if he's done this with you, but Noel, I'm going to ask you in particular, since you have such high cholesterol. What if I say, you have a 0 CAC, but what if I say, like, okay, we're wrong. We think we know that cholesterol is just fine, and walking around with that level of cholesterol is going to be fine. The results are bearing that out. But let's say we're wrong, and in a short amount of time, you might die of a heart attack. Would you be willing to change your diet today?
No, no, because the other benefits are very clear. I mean, I'm an engineer and I love data, but the data of me living my daily life with mental clarity, with extreme mental clarity, the less amount of garbage that I ingest and the more red meat that I ingest, the better I feel. And I have 20-plus-year-old kids, so I'm up there in age, and I worked out with Dr. Sean, and I was able to handle it, and I have great stamina. I'm pretty athletic, not as athletic as my Green Beret husband, but I'm trying to keep up with him. But the diet, my health and my skin is just great. And I've been this way for this period of time, and I only feel like I get better. I'm so much healthier than I was 20 years ago, so much healthier. And it's because of this diet. I just don't believe that it can be bad for me. And also the research that I did along in this book, which was fantastic, of, going through the carnivore code, as well as researching. We went to Alaska this past summer and going through the Athabascan culture, and so many of these, like the Inuit, right? So all of these cultures that were very meat-based, because you just can't grow vegetables in Alaska. So, and how healthy they have been in the past really convinces me that this diet is the way to go. You can give me all kinds of data and tell me that the data is saying this or that or the other, but I'll tell you how I have felt. And I have never felt better in my life.
I've never heard anybody answer that question any other way, so I appreciate that. Kevin, I can kind of ask you, and I assume the answer will be the same. When I ask my friend Robin, who reversed her bipolar, she says the same thing. I'd rather live this way. When I ask Matt, her husband, I'm like, okay, now we're talking about your person. This is your favorite person in the world, walking around with an extremely high level of cholesterol. It's different. You can eat whatever you want, but what about your partner is now, again, what most doctors would say is you're under a severe amount of risk. How does that affect the way you think? And he answered me by saying, I would not trade one single day of the way things were in the past to now have my wife be present and enjoying life and have energy. Kevin, I assume your answer is going to be somewhere along those lines.
Yeah, it's exactly. But I'm gonna switch it up on you a little bit, because I'm gonna switch to one of the problems I see, going back to your pharmaceutical larger topic. And and the answer is, Casey, I agree. I agree completely with her. But to give you a part of my frustrations is you look at like, okay, we're all, I'm a civilian now. I served 24 years in the military, and now I'm a civilian. I can make my own choices. And same with Noel, same with yourself. But a lot of what's dictated by government and regulated as the appropriate way to respond to certain types of cholesterol or other blood results or other things that are often forced upon things like the military. If you want government healthcare within certain aspects of government jobs, you are forced to do this. I go to the VA now. I like the VA. When I was going through the retirement process, which was just 4 years ago, every ailment I had, there was a pill I needed to take for it. And the advice I got was take the frickin' pill, or they're not going to give you any kind of compensation or anything for this. And then there'd be nudge, maybe you just throw it away and don't take it. And if any of my doctors are listening now, I of course wouldn't have done that, but but that's sadly what's happening. So that affects it, and so it's this like, hey, well, we believe cholesterol is good, so you must take these statins. And if you're an active duty soldier, you're getting that, and then that transfers over to the Board of Education and the Education Administration, where we need to give our kids these nutrients. We need to look for these problems. This is what we need to give them. We need to give them these SSRIs if they're speaking out in class. We need to give them these pills. We need to give them all. And those pills all come with big, giant lobbyists with nice, pretty suits that are paying off all sorts of congressional people and showing them statistics that look really good. But the truth is, it's really toxifying our society.
Thank you for that answer. That is such a really good point that I think we forget about as far as the guidelines and groups of people like our military. So this has been an awesome conversation, you guys. I am so excited for the book. I've certainly learned a lot. I know our listeners and viewers will learn a lot as well. I have one more thing I just wanted to ask you about from this interview that you did that I found on YouTube, where you were talking to your friend a little bit about music. You also were talking about one of your latest ventures, which sounds brilliant. This kind of space that you're creating by the beach that has stuff for kids and all. Can you talk about that? That sounds like a great idea.
Cosmic Tiki.
Cosmic
Tiki.
Cosmic Tiki is in Cocoa Beach. It's a beachfront arcade and swimming pool. And also, we just got our beer and wine license, so people can also, so the parents can chill and relax while their kids play, and grandparents as well. We have lots of grandparents who come, and they can go back and forth to the beach. So it's kind of like having your own little, and it's very space themed. So we have a big astronaut and a rocket and lots of fun things that are space oriented in the place.
We came up with it by just, we were originally going to do something different. We're going to have like a little museum thing and some axe throwing and some activities on the beach, because it's right on the main beach, one of the main beach entrances in downtown Cocoa Beach. But we just started watching the clientele, and it was kind of fun from a military mindset. I kind of treated it like a recon. The only difference was I wasn't doing a sexy infill and wasn't jumping on any planes. I just walked my butt up to the local bench, sat down, and started taking notes with a cup of coffee. But we identified the problem in the scenario. And what it was is people were coming off the beach, and they had it all sandy. Kids are screaming. Moms are trying to throw them in station wagons. It's a big giant mess. No one could function. We're like, God, they just need somewhere to sit down and out of the hot sun and have a drink and let their kid jump in the pool. And so we have indoor showers. We have the arcade where you can go to the AC. It gets hot in Florida, so we have AC for the summer. And we just looked at what was going wrong with the people that were coming to the beach and trying to have a good time, and like, well, let's fix what's missing. Let's create. Let's create something that works.
And it's space oriented because we do have a launch.
We're on the Space Coast. We watch rocket launches every week.
Oh, I would love that. Oh my goodness, I would absolutely love that.
Come
I definitely will. If Kevin was like queuing that up and space theme because he used to be an astronaut or something, that wouldn't surprise me at this stage of the conversation. Like last year, one of the conferences I attended was in San Diego, did the low carb, the Symposium for Metabolic Health. And I purposely booked my flight to be a little bit later on the Monday because I spend my entire weekends, which is essentially my vacation time, in a conference room. And I want to go to the beach. And so I go to the beach and I'm there. I've got all my bags and luggage. I've got nothing to do with them. I'm getting sandy. And then I have to go to some stupid outdoor like public shower to try to like rinse off and not smell like beach for my flight back home. What a great way, like you said, to identify a problem and create some value around that and create something that the kids will appreciate, the parents will appreciate, and yeah, people can get cleaned up and go back and forth. I think it's a great concept. So I appreciate you telling us about that.
Thanks.
That's awesome. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Like I said, you guys, I feel like we are our old friends reconnecting, not people that just met about an hour ago. But for now, Noel and Kevin, where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Go ahead.
So we're The Cow is How, the book is obviously on Amazon, and it also is on Instagram as well as on Facebook. I am Noel Heiks. I am Noelheiks. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, pretty active on Facebook. And I think those are probably, and then my new venture that's come out as well, which you'll see on LinkedIn, is called Azultera, Azultera, which is all incorporating this environmental and land kind of ideology, and incorporating cattle into that ideology and making the world a better place through proper use of land and running animals on them. So that's something I'm really excited about.
Yeah, and so she covered the cow is how part of it, and I'm also on. I'm primarily on Instagram, where I support a lot of veteran and special operations networks, and it's Kevin Key, but it's my handle is the Key Brand, because our cattle ranch is a key, like a skeleton key, so it's the Key Brand.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Awesome. Okay. We will link to all of that in the show notes. And like I said, I just so much appreciate all of your work, and to undertake writing a book would be a tremendous amount of work. And so I'm so glad that you did it and brought all these different elements together. I think this is going to be really valuable for people. And it's such a great voice in the space. And I just, again, I've so appreciated getting to know both of you and learning your stories. And like I said, I've definitely learned a lot about all of these different ideas and concepts. So thank you so very much for all of the work that you guys have put in. Thank you so much for the book. And I'm definitely checking out, what was it called? Cosmic Tiki. I'm checking out Cosmic Tiki. Yeah, absolutely. I will for sure. Now, thank you guys so very much for being on our show today. We really appreciate you.
All right. Thanks,
Thank
Casey.
you.
Thank you so much. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.